Hi everybody, Ola, and welcome to the latest edition of The Web of Wyrd. My name's David Farrell, your host, and my co-host, as always, is the wonderful Pete Jackson Main. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing fantastically well, thanks, David. And I'm down here on the south coast of England in Bright Town, where everything is bright and cheery, and people are wandering around because it's very, very hot without many clothes on and all of that sort of typical British summertime stuff. So yeah, it's very interesting. I like a change of scene from time to time, and this has certainly been one.
Well, it's in Britain, summertime basically kicks in the moment the temperature goes over about 12 degrees, right? So can you give us an actual assertion of just how hot it is in Britain? Because I'm hearing that it is actually pretty hot for once. Is that right?
It is. It's in the region of 30 degrees at the moment, and we were promised 27 degrees today, but it's actually I think it's gone way higher than that. Actually, my app at the moment is saying 25, but to be honest with you, I think it's hotter than that. So yeah, and we are in the middle of our second summer here in the UK. We had one, and we thought, oh well, that's it, guys. You know, we've had it. And now we've got another one, and it's lasting a few days. It's lasting until well into next week, which is amazing. And I was just actually thinking also, the coming down here, the sky was incredibly clear until I got around the airports, because I have to go past two airports, when of course the chemtrails became very, very obvious. But down here and up in East Anglia, where I started, remarkably clear skies. So they've taken a bit of a holiday from dropping stuff on us from a great height, seemingly.
Talking of stuff being dropped on us from a great height, in case you're wondering what those loud bangs are in the background, this is a typical Mexican Sunday morning where various explosives go off all over the place. I'm not quite sure what the reason is today, but Mexico is a land of fiestas and parties, and I'm sure that there's probably one happening down the road. So for all of those listeners who may be concerned that I've somehow shifted to the Ukraine or something to do this podcast, please be assured that it's just typical Mexican Sunday morning frivolities that you might hear in the background. So I just want to comment on something actually that we didn't get to talk about in our sort of our pre-recording chat, which is some of the woke energy that has been pervading the world recently. And being down in Brighton, which is possibly the woke capital of Britain, I feel like this might be an opportune moment to bring this into the wider discussion, because it's been in the press a lot this week. And it started off, I think, with an article on the BBC about how they bought in the consultancy to inform all members of BBC about the 150 different genders that they could choose from, and how other colleagues perhaps might be in those spaces and identify with certain names such as Z or Zai or various other things. So did you see that story, bro?
No, I didn't actually, but I have been looking at a lot of stuff around the woke phenomenon. And I have to say that I'm taking it somewhat more seriously than I have done in the past. In the past, I've made a joke of it, and also sort of, I passed an opinion at one point where I think I said something like, you know, the definition of woke is politically correct to the point of idiocy. And I'm kind of rethinking that in the sense that that's a little bit dismissive about something that, in my view, is quite a dangerous development that's sort of overtaking us. I agree that Brighton could be the woke capital of England, but it would have to contend with Cambridge, my home city, for that honour. And actually, when we came here, we thought, oh, it's a bit like Cambridge, you know. But it really, one thing that's got to me, I read an article by a guy called James Lindsay, who's a mathematician, and basically the title of it is something like "Why the Woke Won't Debate You." And there's just a stunning quote in there, which basically says that you cannot disagree with the woke worldview because they have their worldview does not admit that they could ever be wrong. So you either have to agree with them or you cannot disagree with them. There's nothing in between. It's a very, very well argued piece, but it kind of brings forward the fact that, you know, the woke perspective has been really, I think, given a real boost during the old pandemic that we've just been through. because you can see it really coming out in the way that people related to each other in terms of all the injunctions. You know, we've commented before that the injunction to socially distance, wear masks, obey the whole sort of lockdown scenario was never really a hard enforcement by government. It was more of a personal choice to just be, to do the right thing. And that is a very kind of woke mindset, isn't it? So in other words, what happens is people, they don't have to police us because we're policing ourselves. And that's what woke is all about, I think. It's, well, you know, of course, anybody can see that you're just not on the right side of history because you're arguing against us, because nobody in their right mind would argue against us. So it occurred to me that it was a little bit like what I would call sort of parallel ethics. There are ethics and they're kind of on a parallel track with what most people consider morally right or ethically right, or, you know, good quality behavior, if you like. But it's almost as though it's a kind of digital replica rather than the real thing. It's a bit, it reminds me a bit of our discussions about, you know, the digital versus the organic. There's an organic component to ethics that you feel in your heart and you feel in the bones of you that is the right way to behave. And there's a sort of an imprint that's been sort of downloaded by loads of people. Well, this is the way we have to do it. You know, this is what we have to do. This is what we have to think. So I was kind of thinking that this is not just, you know, there's a deliberate intent behind this. I think it's an inculcation and a download that has been sort of thrust upon people who are actually, to be honest with you, because when we first started talking about this, we were talking about the difference between woke and awake. And I think that sort of says it all, really. I think the woke have downloaded what the awake can see plainly is rubbish.
Well, you know what, bro? That's a great review of the whole thing, actually. And yeah, I couldn't really agree more. I mean, I think we're looking to do a sort of a woke versus awake piece a little bit down the road when we've gathered some more ideas around all this, because I agree that this is something that's kind of crept up underneath the radar and has inverted, I think is really the word that I would want to use, so much of our society in different ways. And, you know, and the whole narrative that's been laid out is incredibly narcissistic. And it creates the dialogue, like you said, where because we have the sort of the how to say history on our side, we can say whatever we want. And of course, history itself is a bit of an illusion. So this kind of downloading of this parallel facsimile of what it is to be morally correct feels to me like it's actually empty of emotion. It's a theoretical, hypothetical, very left brain way of looking at things. And to add to the story from the BBC, which is out there, I think it might even be on BBC actually, which is interesting. But the great story that I came across this week on Russia Today is a story about Chris Pratt, the actor, who seemingly has been largely lambasted for culturally appropriating the role of Mario, as in Super Mario, and he's been lambasted because he's not Italian, and so therefore really shouldn't be playing that role because he's not suited for it. To which the author of the article, which you can find on RT for those who can access it, it's written with a fair amount of tongue in cheek, but it was like, well, first of all, Mario's not even a real person, so he doesn't actually technically have a cultural background. So that's the first piece to put in there, which I think is super important. It seems that Chris is really being attacked because he's a Christian, and apparently, according to the rumor mill that was put around, that he was part of some sort of very abusive Christian sect, all of which apparently is not true, and he's not a part of that sect at all. So then the question becomes, well, why is he being attacked for culturally appropriating a role for a character who's not real from a culture that he didn't come from? And as the author of the article points out, it's okay though for people of other ethnic minorities to play historical white people and even mythological characters. I mean, the recent film of The Green Knight, where Dev Patel plays Sir Gawain, who I believe in history probably was Caucasian, and somehow that isn't you know, culturally appropriating in an incorrect way. So I find it very confusing that the narratives get jumbled up according to which perspective you're following. And if you want to get an even clearer and probably more sarcastic view on this, I recommend JP Sears' recent piece on being woke and being white, which in typical JP Sears fashion is very, very close to the bone, but also very, very clever. So yeah, maybe one for a future show, bro. Did I wake up or did I awaken? You know, I think that might be in the end part of the defining characteristics of this piece we're in. Did I wake up or was I awoken? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, JPC is brilliant. Yeah, everybody should go out and listen to that. I did enjoy that. You put me onto that. That was brilliant. It just reminded me though that the woke mentality got into the American herbalists scene. I remember seeing something about this from a guy I think you know as well, Stephen Harrod-Booner, and he was bemoaning the fact that one of the latest conventions of American herbalists, the whole thing had been seized by this junta of politically correct individuals who had decided that most of herbal medicine had been culturally appropriated in the first place, so they shouldn't really be doing it.
Okay, so hopefully the audience, hopefully our audience is getting the point here that we're trying to make, is that this kind of, I mean, sure, we have to be ethically correct, but to the point of this kind of discourse, I think is somewhat ridiculous, because, you know, ultimately maybe I'm disrespecting myself by being culturally inappropriate to myself at various points, by not honoring all of the various DNA strands that I'm either aware or not aware of. So, you know, where does it stop? It's kind of, I feel that perhaps, the lack of real common sense and the more sort of narcissistic, unemotional elements of this kind of, what do they call it? The woke brigade, I think, perhaps is actually a much more subversive force in our society than perhaps we'd realized pre-pandemic. I do think the pandemic has allowed all of this energy up and out. And I, for one, have never seen so many males wearing pink, which of course is a lovely color. And for all men who like wearing pink, I'm not in any way making a comment, but I think you can kind of get where I'm going with this.
Things on my t-shirt from the back, so I can't see it. I use the word facsimile, which I think is a really, really strong word in this context, because that kind of harks back to what I was saying as well. That this is not really people thinking for themselves. This is people hanging up the responsibility for thinking on some kind of pre-downloaded or pre-constructed framework that they don't really have to bother actually taking responsibility for the whole thing. And I think that's a very important dimension too. I mean, for me, I think that if we're going to get through all of this, whatever it is, we have to have sovereignty and integrity. We have to listen to our hearts and our higher callings. And as you said, you know, the emotionless. I mean, you cannot exist on this planet, on this plane, or any, as far as I'm aware, any of the planes without some kind of emotion. Higher or lower. And I think people are not really emotionless. I think they're absolutely slimed up to the eyeballs with emotion, but they've cut themselves off from the neck down. They're just not feeling it.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, and before we move on to the next piece of this week's news, I think the idea of stuff being downloaded or programmed in to sections of society is something that we're very much dealing with already and are going to be dealing with a lot more in the weeks and months to come. And so, you know, what's also interesting is some of the information now coming out of the US in relation to the previously mentioned offered medication. And I believe that on Friday that Pfizer were being forced to release all of the ingredients of that offered medication. So I think that's still in process at the moment over the weekend. So there is a lot of big stuff going on right now, which is kind of a handy lead into the next bits of this week's news roundup. And of course, as huge fans of our mascot of Total and Utter Mayhem, Mr. Johnson left this week, much to probably your disappointment as much as it was to mine, because now I'm not sure what we're going to talk about on future shows, bro, without him. But he definitely went out in a bit of style. He managed to get pretty much everybody offside, you know, in the narrative that is being presented on the goggle box, right, the illusion box. And of course, we're not really sure who all of these characters are. Indeed, if Mr. Johnson is even Mr. Johnson. There's some very credible information out there that says that maybe that he hasn't really been the person we've been seeing on the TV since he was diagnosed with CV back at the beginning of the process. So that's also something to consider. But he did finally step down this week with, I think, over 50 ministers resigning in the space of 48 hours beforehand. So I think that's a fairly clear indication that he'd lost the support of his party on some level. And so now we're faced with some other bits of news that have come up around this, like the fact that he seems to have darked up Mr. Gove on the way out. Clearly, those two are not the best of friends. And he's kicked Mr. Gove out of his £25 million residence that apparently he was squatting in, because it actually is the official residence of Miss Truss, who I think is the Foreign Secretary, or is that right? Or Secretary of Defence?
Secretary, yeah.
And so for me, this raises a bunch of interesting questions, and bearing in mind that most of these politicians are all fairly entitled, very rich individuals anyway, especially Mr. Sunak. And I'm wondering, at a time of crisis and, sort of general financial lack, whether we can really support these individuals living in £25 million mansions and estates. And even if they're not there, they seem to be sort of passed around like some sort of Airbnb or something. So I'm wondering, what do you feel about all of that? Are you really sort of in a bleeding heart space for Mr. Gove that he's now homeless?
I wouldn't say that, David. I can't, what a spectacle, really. What a spectacle, the whole thing. Passing 25 million quid mansions between each other, squabbling over them, getting each other back for things that happened 4 or 5 years ago. And this unseemly scrabble for the top amongst, I can't really see amongst the people who have thrown their hats into the ring. I think that's the expression they use. I can't see one of them that I would like to see in that position. I wrote to you earlier in the week, I think the Tories are a busted flush now. I don't see them being able to bring out a credible leader. I just don't. But would you want the alternative? That's the other thing. So I'm almost betting on a general election, to be honest with you. I might be very, very wrong about that. But I'm just looking at the whole thing and thinking, this is, we need to be awake. We need to keep awake with this one, because, as you say, quite often, when your attention is diverted to something, what are we actually being asked to look at? And the whole thing about them, being put up in these massive squats, and and who, like we say, who actually owns them? Well, I'm assuming that the state owns them. I don't know that for sure. It's the official seat of the Foreign Secretary, I think, is the situation with that particular mansion. I don't think it doesn't belong to Liz Truss, obviously. When you consider that the rest of us are in fuel poverty, food prices are soaring, the economy is tanking, and it's only ever going to be the people at the bottom of the pyramid who are going to suffer because of all of that. And it seems to me that the capstone of the pyramid, or maybe just a bit just underneath the capstone, maybe, is getting very, very heavy and crushing the rest of us. And I think that it's time, actually, for some kind of revolution. I don't think revolutions necessarily work out well. I mean, the one that happened in the Soviet Union was of arguable benefit, but the one that kicked the Soviet Union off in the first place, where they sort of cleared out the royal family and made way for the glorious union, was also flawed. And I've never seen a revolution succeed particularly, but at the same time, I fully understand how people come out on the streets and say, actually, you can just clear off because we want to do this now. It's time you give us a go. Now, I don't know. I'm personally an anarchist. I don't even like anybody ruling me or telling me what to do at all. I think if they all just sort of sat at home for a few days and, I don't know,
left us alone, maybe
some medicine. Yes, partook of some medicine, maybe, and let us all get on with it. Things will be fine, actually, because we know how to run our own lives, and actually it's us that's doing the bloody work. Do you know what I mean? We're keeping the economy going. We're the ones who are out there doing what's necessary, providing the services that people want, and so forth. And that's not going to stop, because we know that needs doing. That's our economy. And I think it's high time we took it back. And I don't see why we can't. I don't see, I thought about, the crash of money, for example, which is coming, the economy particularly. And I thought, well, we will still trade with each other, surely, because we still need stuff. So people who are growing food will have extra food, and people who do what I do, and help people to improve their health will be able to swap that for some food, maybe. And so I know there are bigger structures with things like fuel being brought over and refined so that we can run our vehicles and so forth. I know that there's a lot more to it. I'm not oversimplifying by any means, but it just really gets to me when I see these people playing with their riches almost and flaunting them actually in front of us as well. Why do I want a billionaire telling me what to do? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, no, and so much to look back on there. So I'm just making my notes as usual and just thinking on a couple of things. Let's just sort of look at the election for a moment. And I mean, again, a lot of disclosure going on in the US right now that I don't think is filtering really that well across into Europe, into the mind space of Europeans, including British people. And that is the ongoing expose from the 2000 Mules video about how the American elections were stolen using the Dominion server. Now, I don't know how much of our audience is aware of this, but right now in the US, it seems as if the last election result is currently being decertified by a number of states. And I mentioned this on the previous podcast. And it seems that there is a movement from certain quarters to now start bringing in more fair elections using the quantum voting system or the blockchain system, so that each vote is actually worth the one vote that we've always believed that it was, but clearly wasn't. And I do think back often to the last election when our mascot of Mayhem somehow, even before any vote had been counted, had been given a majority of 80 seats. I remember very clearly watching the process as it unfolded on the television, and I can't remember the name now of the previous chair of the House, the Northern Burko, I think it was, right? He was sat there and they flashed up the projected exit polls, 80 majority for Mr. Johnson, and the Conservative Party, and Burko's jaw literally dropped to the table. It's just like, how can that be? And I remember sitting there doing pretty much the same thing. It's like, how can that be? And how can I know he's got 80 seats? And they got it exactly right before they'd even counted a single vote. I mean, never has the exit polls ever been so accurate. And so it does make you wonder how that came to pass. And I think that what we might start to see across Europe is the possible disclosures and revelations that we perhaps have not been having completely fair elections, and how that process has been going on is about to be revealed, as anyone who's watched that movie will probably understand. So it makes me wonder whether we're moving to a different type of elections, a different type of government. Interestingly, one of the prospective leaders for the Tory leadership is putting forward an idea of reducing government down to a much more small scale, probably about £25 million estates and everything else, which I think perhaps is a move in the right direction to start bringing decision making down to a much more local basis. I mean, if we're moving to a much more harmonious 5D world, that we don't need sort of national defense programs to keep those horrible buggers next door out from invading us, right? That shouldn't be part of where we're heading towards. So many things that governments have told us they need to spend money on for wars probably that didn't need to happen, etc., is probably not going to need to happen now. So I sort of see two possibilities. On the one hand, of course, I'm not in Britain, so I'm not looking at the total chaos that seems to be enveloping your political system. But I agree, maybe the next step is to have another general election, but maybe something new is going to get introduced, maybe some new concepts, maybe Stand in the Park will put forward candidates, who knows? But I 100% agree that whatever is there currently doesn't offer up an awful lot of inspiration, let's just say that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware. You've introduced a new dimension there, because I wasn't aware. You say there's a woman, a conservative, presumably.
Yes, unfortunately, her name is not with me right now, but she's from, I think from more of an...
I think I know the one you mean. I think I know the one you mean, but I've not really been listening to what she's saying, because they don't really give it an awful lot of airtime. They prefer to concentrate on people. I can't remember his name either. The one who said, yes, we're going to spend more money on arms, and we're going to beef up the army because we have to be ready for Russia attacking us and all that. That's oh my God. But I mean, if you're right, bro, I would welcome that. I mean, I think it is time for new ideas in politics. So how fast we're going to be able to get that in is anybody's guess. But with the planetary energies changing in the way that they seem to be at the moment, who knows?
Right. And I think that this is, if anything for these podcasts and generally in life at the moment, is like trying to keep a very, very positive vibration about everything, because otherwise it does all look a little bit dark. And of course, our friend Buzz Lightyear, who's leading the opposition party in the UK to infinity and back, he doesn't seem like he's offering up much, even though he didn't get busted by the old bill for boozing it up, along with all of his party members when we were all supposedly meant to be locked down, not doing that. So it's an interesting mess, really, that's been presented to everybody. And I think at the end, if I'd like to applaud our mascot of Mayhem for anything, I think his unswerving loyalty to exposing all levels of corruption within himself and his government. I think he's done an excellent for an Oscar or something similar. So hats off to our mascot of Mayhem, Mr. Johnson. We salute you.
Hear, hear. You know, and when a political figure like that leaves the stage, mind you, he hasn't gone yet.
No.
He's still actually there. But when a political figure of that stature, and when I say stature, I don't mean moral stature, but of the entertainment stature, we might say, leaves the stage. Satirists and comedians particularly do shed a tear or two, I think, because they've, you know, in one fell swoop, they've lost a lot of material.
Yes.
But look on the positive side, we'll probably be able to watch him playing out his role on the world stage. I think, didn't we say just before we kicked off today that he'd probably get a job as the foreign minister in Zelensky's government, Voldemort's government.
Yeah, we were joking. Of course, Voldemort himself came out this week and saluted Mr. Johnson in much the same way that we just have, and with the full support of the Ukrainian people behind him, who he clearly represents very strongly on all levels, and saying that the Ukrainian people will be very saddened in their hearts to see such an inspiring character as Mr. Johnson depart the scene, or be deposed, I think was the word he used. And in true political style, perhaps Boris is going to do like Mr. Blair and go and work on, I think he worked on the Middle Eastern peace desk, right, after all of this. So, you know, we can only laugh and smile at the way all of this plays out, but I wish Boris well in whatever future work he does, because yes, we are going to miss him, because he has been a cornerstone of our banter over the last few months, and I'm sure that he's the gift that's going to keep on giving, because there's just so much of him to give, right? So, thank you, Mr. Johnson. That's all we can say.
Thank you.
Interestingly, you also mentioned something there about managing ourselves. When I lived in Italy some years ago and was studying at the Buddhist monastery in Tuscany there, we actually had a period, I think it was about 12 months, where there was actually no acting government in charge at all, of any description. And people moved to come into the country and never operated so well, and everyone just seemed to be the whole country was just carrying on anyway, as if we didn't really need a government. So just wanted to throw that in, because Italy has also been in the news this week, along with very prominently Sri Lanka and the Netherlands, because of rioting and actual rebellion, almost revolution possibly. Haven't seen the footage of this one myself directly, but I've been hearing about it from a number of different sources, that in Italy there was politicians were seen to be being chased down the street by angry protesters. And anyone who's seen the footage from Sri Lanka this week will see the high level of merriment that many Sri Lankans are now able to enjoy with the ousting of their presidents, and then they actually were able to use the facilities at his villa, and I saw many people enjoying the luxury of his big pool. So good on the Sri Lankans, that's what I say. And the president actually had been filmed leaving on a boat on a Navy ship. So what's going on in Sri Lanka, dude? What's the story there, do you think?
Well, I actually don't know, but it occurs to me, just as a sidetrack, it occurs to me that there's our answer. You know, the Italians are out on the street, the Sri Lankans are partying. Boris has gone, why aren't we partying? You know, that's what we need to do, clearly. But no, Sri Lanka, very, very interesting place, actually, and sort of, you know, battered both politically and sort of geographically over the last couple of decades or so. But I'm intrigued to hear that, and I don't know much about it, so something to look into for sure.
Well, for sure. And actually, probably from this episode onwards, as long as I don't get into too much trouble, I'm going to start putting a few links in the show notes for some of the... so this is not conspiracy media. Well, as far as we know, you know, it's difficult to really get millions and millions of people to riot, you know, unless, of course, you're George Soros, maybe, and you've got all of these actors at your disposal. But I think that the footage is genuine. And, of course, Sri Lanka is going through a very difficult period. We've been told on the international news that they're literally running out of fuel. The economy is completely tanking. But at the same time, anyone who's been to Sri Lanka, as I have, will probably testify to the fact that it's an incredibly spiritually energetic, high vibration place. and it has been beset with all kinds of problems, of course, with civil war and stuff over the last couple of decades. But the people are lovely. The island is incredibly beautiful. And good old Arthur C. Clarke, the author of 2001 Space Odyssey, I believe, lived there for some time and was moved to comment that he believed that Sri Lanka was actually a portal to other dimensions. So it makes me wonder, is Sri Lanka on the verge of, imploding, or is it actually being emancipated? And I think this is where we can really start to see the two different, very clear timelines opening up. I feel that this week, the more 5D New Earth timeline really came on strongly, particularly with the Sirius Gate on Monday. The energy on Tuesday and Wednesday was through the roof, man. Very, very difficult to sleep. Lots of very, very high potency energy coming to the planet. Me personally, I went very deep with the plants and got a lot of very interesting downloads that may appear in future podcasts. But it makes me wonder, yes, the Sri Lankans stormed the president's palace. They basically took over. It reminded me a bit of the whole Romanian Ceausescu situation, actually. And the president was seen departing Sri Lanka on a Navy warship, so basically getting the F out of D pretty quick. And then, of course, in Holland, we've also had a situation with the farmers protesting. That also got a little violent this week, I believe, with the police opening fire. So we had the truckers convoy in Canada. Now we've got the tractors convoy going on in Holland. Seemingly a large section of the freedom fighters in the US are supporting that motion. So interesting times, and perhaps indicative of the astrology of the Mars and Aries and Eris piece that we've been experiencing over the last week or so.
Yeah, it seems so. And, cautiously, because I sometimes think when these things start erupting, what's really going on? Is it being somehow triggered by the signs of the times and the shifting astrology, particularly, and the solar flares and all of that sort of thing? Or is it being, is Soros behind it? Is it being orchestrated by something more sinister? I guess time will tell, but I think that when people actually get out on the streets and let their feelings be known, at that point I get interested for sure. And it does seem interesting, however, just a sort of a note on that when we had several 100,000 people out on the streets in London protesting against lockdown and restrictions, nobody reported it at all, virtually. I mean, it was not on mainstream news for certain, and it was as though it never happened. I think the BBC once said something like 10,000 people came out. It was easily 10 times that. So I don't know when that sort of stuff happens. I notice it often gets reported when it happens in another country. I'm sometimes a little bit maybe too what's the word? Too down on the British for not venting their spleen appropriately, as I think one has to vent one's spleen from time to time, and we've got plenty to vent about, let's face it. And yet I think that they within recent history, you can see that there's quite a lot. And actually, just completely skipping into another issue for a moment, it's turning out that the number of people who accepted the offered medication was rather lower, even lower than we suspected it might be in the end. I saw some figures that suggested very, very low take up in real terms on the 3 opportunities that we were presented with. And in fact, those figures sort of sliding rather steeply downwards the further the campaign went on. So I find that quite interesting as well. So maybe things are not quite as parlous in this country as we think they are, as we've tended to assume.
Interesting. So yeah, I didn't know that. That is interesting, and that's something that's been bandied around for a while, and I think in the time to come, particularly from a healing perspective, the variables in all of this are going to be critical. And so I welcome the release of all of the information, all of the facts, so that those of us who might be in a position to help with this actually have more data to work with, because clearly there are differences in the effects of the offered medication according to the number of medications that were received. And that's still not really that clear. So at the moment, many of us who are looking at ways to help this situation are working a little bit with one hand tied behind our back, because we don't know all of the variables. What I can be reasonably sure of is that this was a huge experiment. with lots of variables according to all kinds of factors to do with genetics and ethnicity and a whole bunch of other variables. So yeah, that's definitely something that I think is going to come up very strongly. And again, the astrology tends to suggest that we have a very strong full moon coming up next week. And then anyone who's been following the upcoming astrology will understand that we have a very, very big piece coming up at the beginning of August when Mars, Uranus and the North Node all conjunct in Taurus, which is also going to be about the body in many ways. So I think that we're going to have a lot of revelations, and my gut feeling is a lot of the next couple of months is going to be dealing with the aftermath of those disclosures. So interesting times, and perhaps that's a good segue into just having a little bit of a chat about plants and healing. I'm sure, yeah, many of our audience will by now have caught the incredibly interesting interview I did with the Ascended Master Zachariah just over a week or so ago, and that was all about quantum plant medicine. And for those people that watched it, I hope that the trajectory of what we were trying to share is really clear, and that we are now moving into a new health space, and that the plants really are the bridge. They're the transition for us leaving behind or releasing some of the old energies and toxicities in our bodies so that we can become more light filled and able to receive all of the light much better that's streaming onto the planet. And for me personally, you know, the two trackways that have been talked about a lot by myself and also other people like Pam Gregory over the last year or so, it's become very, very clear that's becoming a much more separated path, that there's the people that are thinking much more 5D, and then there are those that are really, really stuck in the 3D, and that there isn't an awful lot of ground in between increasingly, that it's really time to make sure that you're on the right train going to the right destination, because it might be, who knows, might be a little too late to jump off or not. Everything is very, very fluid right now, and we have a lot of water energy in the mix, which is often challenging on the emotional level. But yeah, just wanted to what your takeaways were from that talk with Zach, Pete.
Loved it, man. I just really a privilege to be able to listen in, actually. And you know, I've sort of checked in on various ascended masters in the past and also more recently. And what I found special about this was that just how down to earth the whole thing was. It wasn't a case of massive revelations, because it was like, yeah, he's right. Yeah, he's right. Yeah, that's exactly it. And it was really just bringing that wisdom down in a very, very easy to understand, very honest and obvious way. And I don't remember, I mean, I wouldn't say I've had a huge amount of contact with Ascended Masters by any means, but I don't remember any of them talking like that, especially about this particular issue. So I really, really welcomed his approaching the world of plants, and I think also maybe what we can say to this, I know that there are certain cultures and communities on the earth that have never really lost touch with the plant world, but for the vast majority of our highly sort of technologically advanced so-called civilization, this is a really new strand, and it's a very, very powerful one. I really felt that when I was listening to what he was saying, and yeah, I mean, you know, like you, I know the plants very well myself. Very interesting. The plants that he was talking about are the ones that we are prioritizing at the moment as well. But that whole idea about plant energy, plant consciousness, plant entities actually manifesting very, very strongly at the moment for us and offering us the way out. And that's how I see it. They're offering us assistance. And where else are we going to get it? You know, I think it's really, really important.
Thank you, bro. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of my feeling. Obviously, I was a bit more involved in the interview, and I actually still have to go back and watch it again myself, because when I'm doing those or even having private sessions with Zach, the conversation is going on a multi-dimensional level, and you know, I can only receive so much in the 3D space in that moment. But what's really interesting is, yes, the plants that were brought forward are ones that we've been talking about. That is also partially because of discussions I've had privately with him before. Sure. The real impetus is really to share, and the fact that it seems so normal and so natural and so down to earth is deliberate. We're not trying to make it too out there or too esoteric or something that's unattainable. It's like, no, guys, Dandelion is one of the most powerful plants on the planet. The Artemisia is a kick-ass strong. Horsetail is an extraterrestrial hybrid. being that is trying to share something new with us. So these are incredibly powerful beings, and I hope that through that discussion, and I hope that me and Zach will get to do more with Janet too, because there's so much more we wanted to talk about. We didn't even talk about trees. We barely got going on the mycelium. But the really important plants right now are dandelion, the artemisias, and horsetail, for all the reasons that we talked about and more. But I think it's super interesting right now. You know, we've had very, very strong sort of energy of Sirius this week. We've also got the Lions Gate portal coming up in a week or two, and a few weeks' time. And it's interesting for me that, of course, Dandelion is the lion's tooth and feels very, very connected to that Syrian big cat energy of Egypt. And, you know, also at the same time, Dandelion is a being that has so much magic. And he's now offering us the possibility to look at that in a different way with him and see how it can be brought into our body and have high impact results really quickly. And again, I think for me, the most interesting thing was the way that kind of interview unfolded. And it's like, this is how we are going to shift, guys. Like you can do it without plants, probably, but if you want to do it quickly and you want to do it in a holistic way that's going to heal mind, body, and spirit, these are the plants that you can use. There are many others you can use too, but I think the reason that we kind of honed in on those ones is because they're pretty accessible. Artemisias grow all over the world. Dandelion grows all over the world. Horsetail actually grows pretty ubiquitously too. I've now discovered there's 15 different species of that. Not necessarily all of them are ones you want to ingest, but you know, these are plants that are somewhat ubiquitous across the planet, which also speaks to me of their kind of Buddha nature, their ability to be omniscient and be in many places at once and share their magic and their medicine for pretty much anybody who has the, you know, capacity to understand that and receive it. So this is a super exciting moment, I think, for human plant co-creation and new technology to come through. And, you know, Dandelion really, really is leading the way. And I loved about what he said, you know, the people keep spraying Roundup on it. And rather than shrivel up and go away, no, he comes back even more strong. It's like, no, guys, you're not getting this. I want to share my medicine with you. If you could just stop and, you know, understand that for a second. So he keeps giving more and more and more. You know, and it's like, you know, this is a dude who's had war waged on him probably for the last 80 years or something since they, you know, started spraying stuff on plants. And I'm like, wow, and he still wants to stand up and help, you know. So I love the way that Zach really brought that energy through in the interview and shared it. And I hope has really helped inspire and bring to life the beings, because they are. Let's start thinking of plants like this, is that they are very, very powerful off-planet beings. You know, whether I think of Dandelion perhaps as being a Buddha or Wormwood as being a star being, an incredibly powerful star being, that's the level of beings that we're dealing with. You know, they're not just something that you put a bit of pesticide on and hope that it goes away.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to loop back to something else there, which was, I think, if I remember rightly, he also said something about how emotions with plants were very, very different. They're not like human emotions. So, you know, we kind of drown in our own emotions, particularly the lower ones. And what we don't realize is that those elements of our bodies as well, and I'm talking about our bodies in an expanded sense there, not just the physical, but also the mental, emotional, etc. But the emotional body particularly is something that really desperately needs cleansing. And I think I am absolutely convinced the plants are the way to do that. Dandelion, for example, is in most prescriptions that I write as a herbalist, and in particular to address the liver as a liver dredger. And the liver, of course, is also the repository of a good many of those lower emotions. I think that it's possible to transmute and transform those lower emotions so that they are useful to us. I mean, anger is not necessarily the bugaboo that many people think it is. It's a necessary part of our makeup. The ability to mobilize that aggression is very, very necessary. And I find that the liver dredgers, and Dandelion is absolutely the king of liver dredgers, are the plants to use for that particular purpose. But I remember writing something myself years and years ago when I first got into herbal medicine and natural healing, and it was just a kind of download that came to me. And I remember writing it in an article, and it was this: however misguided and ill-behaved you are as a human, the moment you turn around and you turn back to nature and say, look, I'm really sorry, come and help me sort this out, nature will forgive you instantly. Because all it needs is for you to turn around. All it needs is for you to turn around and look and see what's there and the help that's there for you. And at that point, you can't go back. You know, you may have those moments of negativity and recalcitrance again, we all sort of have our stories to tell with that, but you repent of it almost immediately, and when you're going off the rails, and for me, when I feel myself going off the rails, it's the plants I turn to.
Yeah, so many interesting things there also, just to kind of make a brief comment on. So you're right. I mean, the physical body, all of our physical bodies, mine included, is going through a little bit at the moment. And as I mentioned on the previous podcast, I definitely got hit by some very, very nasty heavy metal chemical poisoning, which I can merely only describe as being attacked by a bioweapon. That's how it felt. But it's also alerted me to the possibility that I might be having residue graphene in my body, which is why certain things haven't shifted, and that's now come very strongly into my awareness and is making me wonder about plants like horsetail, for example, that may be able to shift these elements in our body. And if, as I suspect many of us through chemtrails or interactions with our health service, somehow we've got some of this substance into our bodies, it definitely has an effect on the veins. I can see in my case that it's definitely had a coagulating effect. And I'm wondering, how much this is affecting everybody else. But the 3D body is really our representation of the 4D emotional pain, so this is a big part of the cleanup job, and perhaps we'll do a bit more kind of dimensional mapping on a future show, because I find that people often make it more complicated or get confused than it needs to be. And so if we just think of the fourth dimension or the astral planes as the realm of the human emotions, which are non-physical, it's that plane really where we have to do a lot of the work, because until we've cleaned up that space, both for ourselves on a personal level, but also on a collective level, because that's also where the matrix was held, that was keeping the illusion of the world that we were living in, that all has to be cleaned up. And if we're just looking at trying to clean up in the body, as Western medicine does, we ain't really going to get very far, which I'm sure as anyone who's been, trying to get healed in the NHS over the last 30 years can probably testify to, you don't really ever seem to get an awful lot better. I know so many people that have been going in and out of that facility and not getting better. And I'm like, well, if you're not looking at the emotional problems, you're not going to get better. And so I completely concur that the plants are the best methodology to start cleaning up our own personal 4D astral emotional space, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think I've always been, the kind of herbalist who prescribes with that very much in mind, and my personal history is very much about, before I even got into naturopathy and plant medicine, I was sort of interested in the workings of my own mind and the way that very, very keenly affected my health, and I saw the same thing happening in other people. Wrote a number of papers on it in the early days when I was into energy medicine, and that perspective never left me. But one of the things I resist really strongly is I've had a number of opportunities to speak recently, and I've got a couple coming up where I know what they're expecting. They're expecting me to go into the sort of objectivist research on it all and prove that this chemical does this or makes you live longer or whatever. And I'm never ever in a million years going to do that. And I've sort of, I tend to polarize people when I talk, because on the one hand, there are people who welcome my viewpoint as being very refreshing. There are others who just say I haven't got the scientific rigor that they're looking for, and I don't care, because this perspective is the one. And I do it, when I'm working with people as well. I work with people with fairly, serious pathologies, including cancer. The first place I go is, where's the emotion? What's happening with the emotional body? Because that's where frequently the problem is situated. I was just thinking again something about Dandelion. It's just skipped out of my head annoyingly. But it is one of those that, I loved what you said about the war that's been waged on him, and he's still smiling in our faces going, yeah, all right, never mind about that, let's just get on with it. Beautiful stuff.
And one of the great energies of Dandelion, apart from all the things we talked about on the call with Zach, being a Time Lord and a master geneticist, is also this idea that he helps us to manage the design and flow of our energy. Because I think generally, from what I've seen with myself and many other beings on the planet, is that we don't manage that very well, and we tend to expend a lot of energy on emotional disturbances that we don't need to, and those lead us into perhaps unhelpful tracks of 3D activity that also waste a lot of our energy. And I feel with so many people, myself included, in the last few weeks experiencing extreme tiredness, which could be partly to do with the sort of solar flares, coronal mass ejections, but also possibly with other unhelpful frequencies that are perhaps being pumped at us for a variety of reasons, that, you know, that our bodies are going through a lot, and that we should be gentle with ourselves. And, you know, just to share a small anecdotal story that's very Dandelion, for anyone that signed up to the RSVP on my new website for that talk with Zach, I had an absolute technological meltdown of a day. The recording went brilliantly. I decided the whole thing was meant to go out at 2 o'clock. Unfortunately, what I hadn't checked in with was Dandelion and also Zach, who had another idea, and that was that the video wasn't going to go out until the following day. So by 2 o'clock, the video that was meant to be going out had still only uploaded to the web by 2% and seemed to be crawling along at the pace that I'd never seen before. And so I got a little stressed, tried to send out an email to everybody, which I did, but put the wrong email address, wrong web address. And then somebody messaged back and said, yeah, hey, dude, it's still not working. And then I realized I spelled quantum wrong. So I then had to put out another email and just, oh my gosh, this is so not how I like to do things. So I checked in with some plants and with Dandelion directly. I was like, what's going on? I'm like, well, yeah, it was only you, brother, that decided the video was going out today. We'd already decided it's going out tomorrow. But I was just like, okay. And they were like, you know, if you sit and think about it, there really is no real difference between whether it goes out today or tomorrow, other than what was in your head, brother. So why don't you sit yourself down, have a beer and look at the view and just relax, because it ain't going to go out till tomorrow. So 14 hours later, the video finally uploaded, I think at 4 o'clock in the morning or something, and started being seen. So I feel like Dandelion was like really saying to me, here's lesson number 1, let go of your, you know, what's in your head. Take a chill pill, sit down, and realize that everything is actually already okay and everything's perfect. And so it's like, you know, typical sense, he was like, El Dandelero has spoken, and basically sit down and chill the hell out, brother. So I did, and I felt a lot better. So, you know, this is one of the beautiful qualities of Dandelion. But before we finish up with today's show, I just want to bring in another couple of plants that have been in our awareness. And one of them was one that Zach did talk about, one of the heart medicines, which is Hawthorn, who I know that you're very good friends with, right, bro?
I am indeed. Yeah, she took me by surprise, I have to say. I know you have warned me that this is a family show, so I won't go too far into that. She worried me a little bit at one point, but she was beautiful. And really, I want to talk about, if I want to bring something about Hawthorn forward, I think it's a very important plant for this country, particularly, and that's what she showed me in my journey with her, and it was to do with holding the heart space for this country, because, you know, all the things we talk about, all the politics, all the mayhem, and the various things that we don't like that are going on, and how we're going to get out of it all, we still have our land, and actually it doesn't belong to these people. It belongs to I guess we borrow it while we're here, but it is ours, and it's ours to look after. We're the custodians. And she made me see that very, very clearly. She showed me a vista of the English countryside, quintessential English countryside. We were in Somerset at the time, and said to me very clearly, hold the heart space for this land. And that was a bidding that I took particularly seriously. And it's one of, you know, I've spoken about this with you before, bro, but it's one of the reasons that I don't immediately fly off to join you in Mexico or find some other, you know, pied-à-terre somewhere away from all this mayhem. Because I do take very seriously the idea that we're going to have to put things together here at some point, and there are going to need to be those of us here who can do that. And I'm not saying that in a boastful way at all, but who are passionate enough to believe in what this land can offer. And that's really, and when I actually talk about that and about that message, very personal message to me, but also kind of, you know, a universal message as well. I can sort of feel the expansiveness of that as well. And there's, you know, if the new earth is on the way, and you say sometimes, bro, that is already here, and I kind of believe that. Actually, it's not that we necessarily can see it all the time, especially over here, but I did see it at that point, and I know that it's there, and that, I think, is what we've got to focus on. So for me, Hawthorn is by situating yourself in your heart, you cannot help but be in the new earth and to bring the new earth forward.
Booyaka. And I think that that's really important, what you just said right there. And yeah, I mean, we use this show to poke fun a little bit of what's going on in the world, but also to show that we're not taking it too seriously. And why? Because we've got the plants with us, and we have utter impeccable confidence that they're going to assist us. And when I think about plants like Hawthorn, you know, the heart medicine and what you've just said, and of course in Wales, it's everywhere. It grows across all of the landscape, and you see this beautiful, very old, wizened hawthorn trees everywhere. And then, you know, in the spring, you get the white blossoms, and it's like the whole landscape is just kind of covered in this almost like snowflakes. It's so incredibly beautiful. And, you know, yeah, when we think about 5D consciousness, we're talking about heart consciousness. And when we're in the heart space, everything is different. You know, we're operating from a very, very different kind of space, from the sort of much more left brain, sort of process driven, top down, sort of more Germanic way of doing things. We're coming from a much more organic right brain, almost Celtic way of doing things, I think, in many ways. You know, there's very clearly for me in Britain, there's always been the much more Germanic left brain and the much more kind of Celtic right brain way of doing things, and you know, one's very oral, hence you know, the traditions of the bards and everything, and the storytelling and the songs that come from those cultures. And then we have the much more sort of domineering process driven production aspect of the more Germanic tribes that have ended up in Britain. And so it's kind of interesting, again, you've got that balance there, which is important, you know, I think to equally have something to offer. But hawthorn is an incredibly powerful heart medicine, and like everything you've just said, you know, that space needs to be held across the planet. And you know, we have actually, as it turns out, quite a few different species of hawthorn here in Mexico, which I'm now discovering, and it's given rise to the idea of mixing with another heart medicine that I've recently discovered, which is the maguey plant, otherwise known as the Mezcal Drink, to maybe do a hawthorn mezcal. I'm like, well, okay, that would be kick-ass, man. Two heart medicines in one. So, so yeah, food for thought. But I want to finish up just by bringing today into one more plant, which is one that we both know a little bit about, but I think is also really, really important for the time to come, which is rosebay willow herb, or otherwise known as fireweed. What can you tell us about this wonderful plant, bro?
This is amazing, isn't it? And it's right, it's banging season at the moment. And again, I'm noticing on my journeys around the place, just coming down here a couple of days ago, it was just all over the place. Typically grows like some of the ones we talked about before, typically grows along road signs, particularly railway tracks. My partner reported that she's been down to London a couple of times on the train, something I haven't done for a while actually, but it's all the way down the railway tracks there. And it was you, I think, in the plant consciousness event we attended that that made me aware of her ability to repattern. And when you look at the medicinal virtues of rosebay willow herb, you find out that what she does is she particularly reorganizes the microbiome in the gut. So she balances, and she also has antifungal properties. So she's good for candida overgrowth and all of those side of things. So really, she has mucilaginous properties, which are very, very important in the gut, both for feeding good bacteria and also just for soothing inflamed surfaces. She has tannins, which again bind and astringe and help to protect the surface of the intestines. A very, very important remedy for the intestinal system. Generally, inflammation modulating as well, and antispasmodic. So all of the qualities that you might require actually for helping to rebalance your digestive system in particular, but also quite a good vulnerary herb as well for our external use. So a herb really that works on the epithelial surfaces of the body. That's the internal and external skin, you know, the mucous membrane and the actual skin. And when you think about that in terms of repatterning, it's absolutely perfect. Because when you've had an assault on, you know, whether it's a bacterial overgrowth or some form of inflammation or injury of some kind, and it's kind of left scars, basically what you want is for something to come along and just erase all of that and restore it to normal structure and function. That's what fireweed will do.
That's so fascinating. I know that me and you've talked about this before, though not for a while, because, you know, the way that I work with fireweed from the quantum space is that she's my trauma imprint removal plant. So we can remove traumas from the field, we can remove attachments and energies. But what I came to realize some years ago was underneath that, sometimes it leaves an energetic imprint, which means that there's still some low level chime in the field that's holding that information of trauma. And, you know, what you shared about the candida and the fungal growth and everything, you know, when I investigated this before, it made me think of colonization. And so what I really get with Fireweed is that this is a plant that can help remove the trauma imprint of colonization, which is a big one pretty much for the whole planet and that we are dealing with right now. And not only does it remove that, it then creates a new blueprint. And this is how I work with it with all of my clients, is I do a complete trauma imprint cleanse on the energy field of the client. And then I ask Fireweed in the most appropriate ways for each individual to repattern those areas that were affected to a more appropriate, or the most appropriate blueprint for the client to then kick on in whatever way is appropriate for them. And when I really tune with Fireweed, I just get this incredible sense of futuristic technology that really what we're talking about, I think, is just a very, very small tip of quite a big iceberg. So super exciting, huh? I mean, it just, again, we're trying to share some of the more quantum 5D to 3D ways of looking at things, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Fireweed is a herb that I've sort of had passing acquaintance with. I only really got to know her properly in our session last October, and I'm just so excited to go around the place and seeing seeing the evidence, seeing her springing up in the beautiful colours. Remember, very kind of a pink version of Evening Primrose, because they're the same family. And I was in the Botanic Gardens, as you know, recently, the Botanical Gardens in Cambridge, and I was actually shot against a background of Fireweed and Evening Primrose in one of the presentation bits that I did. So that was quite nice, because they have all the plants arranged in families, and there's just amazing display of bright that typical bright magenta pink of Fireweed against the strong lemon yellow of the Evening Primrose was very, very striking. And two colours that really probably don't go together at all when if you're thinking about decorating your house.
They might do if you're woke, though.
Well, yeah, if you're woke, possibly. But just natural colours, I think, don't really clash in that way.
I mean, it's again, this is where when we're kind of playing Sherlock Holmes with the plants, where I used to live in Wales, it was actually the county flower of Radnorshire, because it literally grows everywhere up there. And what I came to learn about Fireweed is that it's the first plant that grows back whenever there's been a forest fire. So it's literally a plant for new growth, in the same way that I think that the ash, the birch, the silver birch, which is one of the first trees that grows back. So these are pioneer plants that pave the way for regrowth certainly in nature. The Fireweed is the plant, that paves the way, because it has so much seeds, and the seeds are geared towards blowing on the wind. And so they can literally spread across the whole hill and regenerate the hill in one season. So by the next season, the ground is much more ready to receive other plants that are going to help bring new growth. So when we look at how the plant operates in nature, we get a very, very good idea of what it can do in the physical body, but also how it can work in a quantum way on our emotions and our lives. And for that reason, I think that Fireweed is another one of these plants that's really offering a lot. I think all the plants are offering a lot, but these are just the ones that we happen to know. And actually, when I really went into the research with Fireweed, when I was working with her really strongly a few years ago, I realized that even though she's not so much known in our kind of medicinal herbal culture, she very much is known by all of the First Nations tribes. And interestingly, one of the few sort of visuals I've had with Fireweed was as a First Nations medicine person. So I'm like, again, I often think the plants present themselves maybe initially or whatever in a cultural context to which they're sort of most well known. So it would make sense. Yeah, okay. In fact, it was because the plant appeared in that sort of First Nations medicine person guise that I went and looked into it and found all of this information that the First Nations people use this plant. So maybe this is a plant that we can get into again in more detail, bro, but we've hit the limit for today. We've covered quite a bit of ground as usual. As always, I hope our audience can follow the subplots and subthreads to what we're talking about, and also realize that there are many, many plants that are helping us right now, if we let them in, to help us organize our lives, clear out the unhelpful toxicity, and help get us ready for, I think, a big transition, which is already underway. Yes, indeed. I've said it before, New Earth is definitely here. It's as much a frequency and a way of being as it is a place on the earth. I know many people are looking for those New Earth communities, and they are already forming, but they're forming at a higher 5D mind first, because they have to. and then they'll get manifested down into 3D. That is a big part of the shift, is understanding that we create in the higher mind 5D space. And if we've cleaned up that often gunky 4D emotional astral space, and that's nice and clear, then the channel from 5D down into 3D is super open. And then we can really start becoming embodied 5D humans in a 3D form, which is super exciting, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that also, just to reiterate something that's been a big theme today, I feel, you know, to the listeners, take that idea seriously of forming your own alliances, forming your own relationships with the plants. That's your homework for the week, I think. Go out and just kind of, you know, talk to them and see which ones are coming into your awareness.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And please always do feel free to comment, folks, in the boxes. Me and Pete love hearing from you. We also enjoy receiving emails. I get many, many interesting anecdotes from all of you out there, actually, which helps us build an even bigger picture. Somebody sent me this week some ideas about testing with Dandelion for arsenic in the body and whether it can remove it. So there's many, many new ideas and impulses, which is all part of the 5D download the plants are giving us now. It's not just the likes of myself and you, Pete, that are doing this. I've got other students and clients out there sending me so much intuitive information right now that I know is coming from the quantum intelligence of the plants, because it just has a ring and a resonance to it. It's like, okay, this is definitely coming from the plants. So please do keep sending us the emails, keep commenting. We really appreciate all of it. And you know what, keep having fun with it all, everybody. It's, you know, we're trying to navigate our way through a very, very choppy part of human history. This is an incredibly big moment to be alive. And, you know, I think that if we can remain in a place of awe and wonderment and love about all of it, then we might just actually enjoy it. And again, we have, you know, Mr. Mayhem to thank for playing a somewhat, you know, humorous role in all of this, because he certainly has made me and you chuckle a fair bit, right? So, yeah. Final thing, bro, I'd like you to share again, what is your website and where can people get you on an email address if they want to message you directly?
Yeah, you can contact me directly through the website on the inquiries email. It's www.thenaturalcentre.com. So the Natural Centre is all one word, and centre is spelt the English way, not the American way, by the way. RE at the end. So that's how you can get hold of me if you want. And I'd be delighted to hear from any of you. Of course, a couple of people actually have this last couple of weeks have emailed me directly, which is really nice.
Yeah, no, good. And likewise, you know, I have the global Dandelion Immersion coming up, starting on the Mayan Day at a time on the 25th of July. I haven't quite updated my website yet, but I will be doing that in the next couple of days. And me and you are going to be doing a piece with Dandelion around that specifically. Absolutely. So big focus coming up on Dandelion, everybody. And, you know, again, like Pete has just said, I urge you all to really just open yourself up. And sure, we're talking about plants that are stepping forwards at the collective level, but for everybody, there's individual plants. And that's the beauty of this work, is, you know, that it's so personal, and the plants make it personal between us and them. And so we form these alliances and friendships. And the more that we can start to see these beings as higher beings who are coming to help us and be friends, and the more that Zach said, then you know, the compulsion to give something back is there. So if you get something from a plant, please do, you know, maybe sprinkle some tobacco or give a little gift or a prayer or sing a song or something. You know, nature really does respond to the reciprocity. So yeah, please do check out my website, quantumplанthealing.com. Hopefully, yeah, you don't need to spell quantum for those of you out there, because apparently I can't spell it. And please do check out the Zach video, which is on the YouTube channel and also up on Wisdom Hub, if you haven't already seen it. I think it's possibly one of the most important interviews I've ever done. So thank you, bro, for your time. I know you're super busy, and I hope that your partner's exhibition is going really well down in Bright Town. And hopefully everyone out there is managing to hang on with all of this energy, and just keep riding the wave, folks. New Earth is here, and the plants are leading us to it. And all we have to do is open our hearts and listen to what they have to tell us. So on that big note, peace out, everybody, and see you next time. Ciao for now.